So my mum is in her early 80s and she's basically dyslexic. Her eyesight is going and she wants to go to the bank and get some money and do the normal things. But being dyslexic, she struggles with the online services. Every time she phones them up or uses the app, she's got to reset her password because she can't remember her password. And so she used to just go across the road to local NatWest and go to the cash machine. Sorry, to the local Nationwide, go to the cash machine and get money out. 2 weeks ago, about 4 o'clock in the morning, big bunch of people stole the cash machine. And there you can see on the screen, it's gone. So she is now absolutely dependent on digital. She's not kind of somebody in the distance. The ease of the app is vital. And without it, she's then dependent on the rest of the family to do the shopping for her, anything else. And so that's why a really good experience, thinking about people who are dyslexic, thinking about people with poor eyesight, thinking about people who don't remember passwords very well, is key, because the rest of the app could be wonderful, but if it doesn't work for them, they're struggling with their money. So I'll pass over to Jonathan for another example of my mum.
Thanks, Pete. So my mum, Beryl, she's about 80 and she has been losing her sight gradually over the last few years. And so, initially it kind of started in terms of her and technology with my dad saying, well, hey, how about a Kindle? If you can't, read books quite so clearly anymore, maybe a device where you can change the size of text would really work for you. And she was incredibly resistant to that for around about 6 months. And then she found the iPad that they had the similar sort of thing. The screen had a backlight. It was really bright. She didn't need to carry a light around with her. And she could, as I say, read the books that she wanted to. So that was a real breakthrough moment for her. And then some more recently over COVID, she wasn't somebody who liked doing lots of online shopping. I don't think she'd ever bought anything on Amazon. She's certainly never done groceries online. Every time we talked about it, she said she wanted to pick her own fruit. Well, actually, 2 weeks into lockdown, I was sitting there thinking, you're not going out anywhere at the moment, and neither am I, and I'm getting a Ocado delivering all of my stuff, so I'll do the same for you. And that got her over the worry about the fruit. The fruit that came was great, and so she decided that she wanted to do the ordering herself. She prefers Tesco's, so that's what she used, and she had a great experience of the call centre at Tesco's. Basically, she couldn't work out how to use the website at all. And so she spent 3 hours on that call center getting everything right for her. That's brilliant on Tesco. Well done. Your call center's magnificent. The people have patience of saints, but it's probably not very good for them in the sense that was an expensive process for them. 3 hours on a call center. The whole point of digital, everything that all of us are doing at the moment, no doubt, is stuff that could have been done in an analog form in the past. And so we want as many people, including my mum, to be able to use that digitally without clogging up call centers. So today is really all about how do we make sure that when older people are either wanting to or having to use digital, that if we're the people who created those digital websites, apps, whatever it is that they're using, how do we create them in such a way that they have a good experience? And what I wanted to start off with was just a little bit of a kind of scene setter around older people, what sort of needs they have, how many people are out there, how are they using digital? If you are not thinking about these people at the moment, then why would it be a very, very good thing for you to do in the organization that you work to start doing that? Well, really, the first thing to think about when we think about accessibility and older people is that most of the time when we think about accessibility, we think about people who have extreme impairments. The obvious one would be someone who's completely blind using a screen reader. Most of the time when we're thinking about older people, the impairments aren't quite so extreme, but they are multiple. So it's people who can't see as well as they used to, hear as well as they used to. They can't control their hands as well as they used to. They can't understand as well as they used to, especially new technologies that they may not have grown up with. They can't remember passwords like Pete was talking about there. This actually isn't so uncommon. One of the things that most people don't realize about people with a disability disability is that most people who have a disability actually have more than one impairment. So they, only 26% of people who have an impairment only have one. So, for example, my nephew Carl, he was born with spina bifida. That's the condition that he has. That means that he's slightly autistic, that he has learning difficulty, and that he uses a wheelchair. That's three things that come from one condition. And that's the reality for most people out there. So just something to think about. And really, when it comes to older people, the number of people in the population who are older is going up and up and up. If we just look at the chart on the left here, the number of people in the world aged 60 or over is expected to grow past 2 billion by the year 2050. So things are really massively ramping up, as thankfully we all live longer. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, in Japan, that when they think about accessibility, if you look at the standards for accessibility, they're for older and disabled people, not disabled people, and we probably forgot those older people as well. But actually, that's the way they look at things in Japan, because they have a culture which is very respectful of older people. So even if accessibility wasn't necessary for people who have a disability at all, if it's necessary for older people, that's the way it's important in many countries. And I mean, just looking at in terms of how it would impact businesses, in terms of customers, the silver pound, that's the spending power of people who are older, just in the UK is worth 43 billion pounds a year. Put simply, everybody else who's older than most of the people on this call has got a miles better pension than all of the people on this call. Unfortunately, that's the way pensions went, and a lot of the wealth of the country is actually in older people. They want to spend that, and they can spend it with your company if you sell products, if they can use your website. And yet, weirdly, the Institute of Customer Service claims that 63% of business leaders focus on the young audiences. The baby boomers, who are this huge generation that have this much wealth, hardly ever get marketed at. So this is a real own goal, if you like, especially because for a lot of people who are older, actually, if they can get online and use things, that could be much easier for them than actually getting out to the shops, doing all of those sorts of things. They're less likely to be able to get to bank branches. They will have a struggle to hear calls on call centers. All of these sorts of things mean that digital, if they can use it, can be a massive bonus, not just in lockdown conditions in COVID, but all of the time. And the other thing to know is that they are massively loyal to services that work for them. My mum went back to Tesco to do her online shopping. She didn't go to my Ocado. Staff is the other thing here. So if you're not selling things to people via your website, you've probably got staff in your organization who are aging. The 65 and over population will nearly double in the next 3 decades, and people are working longer and longer. The person you can see there on the screen, that's Robert De Niro in the film The Intern. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. Gives you an insight into the sort of real wisdom and experience that a lot of older people can bring to organizations. And actually, HR departments are finally getting the point that one of the best talent pools out there is actually their own staff as they get older. So there's lots of reasons for making sure that we are supporting all of these people in a really good way. How do you support their digital needs? If you want to have Robert De Niro working in your organization, what do you need to do? Well, part of it is WCAG. WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that's the thing that everybody who kind of knows very much about accessibility knows. The problem is WCAG was really researched for people who have a disability. The research to actually look to see how those standards help people who have maybe similar impairments but slightly different because they're aging is actually something called WAI Age. And the person you can see here on the screen is a guy called Andrew Arch. He was the person who led this research. There's a link at the bottom of the screen there. If you want to hear him being interviewed by me a few years ago, then go to our website and just put in older in the search. You'll find it very easily. This was a quote from him. It's a lot more about usability than technical solutions. People aren't interested in learning how to use a screen reader if they lose their sight after they turn 80. It's things like bigger text, buttons easier to click. They basically want to do things the same way the rest of their family does. That's massively important. So all of the assistive technologies and all of the sorts of things that we use to help people get a really good experience online oftentimes is not a solution to someone who is older, because they feel that's kind of clunky. That's not the person they want to be. So all the way through today, we're gonna be showing you, if you like, user needs from people who are older and some of the things that can help. And I'm going to start now, before handing over to Graham, just talking about one around hearing. This is the thing that most people totally forget when it comes to accessibility. Most of the time, because if you have a hearing difficulty, you don't have a problem using the website at all very much. In fact, the only times you really have a problem is when there's something which is video or audio. So things like, people saying, well, okay, I want captions on that. Or actually, for those of you who don't know anything about tinnitus, this is a condition that is quite common, especially in later life, where people have difficulty hearing higher registers. So things like really pumping background music can make it harder to hear people speak. So what I wanted to say is that you're going to get a lot today about, hints and tips on how to make things work better for people who are older. But what we know is the best thing to do is to actually listen to people who are older. And I wanted to give you one example before I hand over to Graham about that. So we do this thing at Hassell Inclusion that we call speed dating. This enables our clients to meet, at the moment over Zoom, people with various different types of disabilities and actually talk with them about how do you feel like our product is going, or what's life like for you, and that sort of thing. And we were doing this with one organization a little while ago, and we were desperate to show them it's not this person. We keep the anonymity of all of our user testing people. But this is just an example of the thing that had totally transformed one older person's life. So he was 70 and he had two conditions at the same time. One was difficulty hearing, so he couldn't use the phone to contact call centers. The other thing was difficulty typing. It took him a long time. So things like chatbots and that sort of stuff didn't work either. And the key thing that he was saying when we were chatting with the people who owned this particular website, which was in financial services, was the bit of what they did, which was insurance, that he really cared about most, was what happened when he made a claim. Because he was worried that he would have to speak to someone on the phone who he couldn't hear. And the great thing was we did all of this actually on Google Meet. And Google Meet has given you the ability, like we've got here via Otter, to turn on captions. And suddenly, his experiences with communication were totally transformed. Put simply, you give him a video call with Google Meet and suddenly the world is a much more open place for him. So it just gives you one idea. Nobody, on the call was really thinking about their customer service line. They were all thinking about their website. He, that particular user, was able to say, actually, that's the thing that really matters to me. And the way that we're doing this call, this is the solution to the things that I need. Can you make your contact center work like this? Just gives you one idea about how these things can open up. So as I say, we do all of this kind of speed dating, user research type stuff. We'd love to chat with you about that if that's going to be of interest to you and your organization. What I'm going to do now, without further ado, is to hand you over to Graham. He's going to talk you through what it's like to make sure that developers can do the right thing to help older people. Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, I am not muted anymore. Yeah, my section is talking about one or two things that developers can do to make people's lives easier. That's also not making them harder as well. So let me get focus into there. I'm going to mention my mum and dad as well. They're in their 80s. Lockdown has been hard for them. And they were regular web users before lockdown started, but more just sort of like informational stuff from that, really. Their needs are the same as has been mentioned already by Jonathan, and that my mum and dad's eyesight is not as good as it used to be. They just need things to be clear and simple. And also my mother struggles a little bit with color contrast on some websites. Now, browser settings can help them, and I've showed them how to do certain things within browsers, But it's important that developers, since that's the angle that I'm talking here, don't actually block some of the things that people do in browsers. I want to start by talking about making things bigger, which is a requirement my parents have sometimes. In browsers, zooming and text resizing are both present as features. They are both geared up for making things bigger, but they work in slightly different ways. Zooming is the default option in pretty much all browsers as far as I'm aware, but text resizing is there as well. The difference being that zooming makes everything bigger and text resizing just makes the text bigger. And I've showed you screenshots from Chrome and Firefox on how you can influence these things to try these things out. Now, you might wonder why people use text resize instead of zooming. Well, sometimes it's the presence of these things, the horizontal scroll bars. This is from Sainsbury's website just the other day. I've gone into this site and I've zoomed up quite a lot. I'm starting to get horizontal scroll bars. They provide a lot, they're difficult to use for people, especially on long pages with lots of content. You're forever having to sort of like swipe backwards and forwards to left and right to actually read the content. So people, if they know, will try doing a text resize instead, because that might actually solve the problems of not having the horizontal scroll bars. Okay, so what can developers do? Well, they shouldn't prevent that from happening, basically. So when a developer is building a style sheet for a site, they should always specify the font sizes in EMs or REMs. You may not know what that actually means, but they'll be familiar with them. Don't use pixels or points to define your font sizes, because otherwise the fonts will just not resize in Internet Explorer 11, which some people are still using, and Chrome, which is a browser that lots and lots of people are using. Okay, here's a screenshot from a Hong Kong banking website, and this is what it looks like under the bonnet. I'm not going to show you much technical stuff, but here I've got a heading, integrated type deposits account. This is thing here, and here the developer has styled that heading to have a font size of 16 pixels, which means that on this website none of the text can actually be resized at all in Chrome and Internet Explorer. That's a real problem. Okay, so one thing to do is to make sure that your site responds to that. The key thing to do is to test it though, because resizing can cause problems along the line. This is from the same Hong Kong bank website, and it shows you what it looks like elsewhere in the site. When I've done some text resizing, you end up with this horrendous clashing of text here, okay, because you're fixing things on the screen in the wrong place. Effectively, you need stuff to be a lot more fluid, okay, and it's not hard to look in the UK for examples of this as well. All of these examples are where I've gone to a site, done text resize. Okay, so, well, maybe we should provide some kind of widget like you see on some sites for doing this. And yeah, I built one. This screenshot's from one I built for a website I did many years ago. And that works fine on that particular website. But the great thing about the browser settings is that you can get them up so that they persist across every site that you visit. This widget that I created here only ever works on this website. So when up to a different website, it just didn't work. That's all I'm going to say about making things bigger directly, but I will cover it a bit more in a moment. I want to talk about responsive breakpoints. Now, developers understand breakpoints because they've been using them for years. It's about how you get your screens. This is the Hassell inclusion screen on my laptop here, how it gets it to look tidy on a smartphone, on my smartphone here. You can see that the navigation has disappeared and it's hidden in this button area here, and the layout of the page has changed. Okay, that's what breakpoints do. Developers are familiar with that. But you can also use breakpoints to cater for people who make the text larger as well. This is once again on my laptop, full size, and this is what it looks like once again, laptop full size. But what I've done here is I've actually made the text bigger. So it's brought in the mobile view at full desktop width, which is great. Okay, the navigation's gone in here again. Okay, so that's easy to do too. This is not the breakpoints for the Hassell inclusion site, but this is another older one that I was involved in. Okay, so here, screen size of 600 pixels is important, and this breakpoint here is influenced just by the screen width. What I did is I changed that that's now set to 38 ems. It's still influenced by the screen width, but it's also now triggered by the size of the text as well. So if I make the text bigger, then I'll get the mobile view on my laptop. And it's easy to do. All I did was divide 600 by 16 and then take the nearest whole number, and it worked straight out of the box. That's easy, something easy that developers can do. Another thing that you don't want to do is to prevent the pinch zoom gesture on touchscreens, on your smartphones or your iPads or whatever. There's lots of code underlined at the top of the pages, your web pages. You'll have meta tags like this. If the developer has put these in, maximum scale 1, user scale equals no, what that does, it prevents someone using the pinch zoom gesture on that web page. So that's not very helpful. Even if your site is already responsive, it may not be big enough. People might want to go bigger. Okay, so putting aside the making things bigger, we need to make things easier for people to find their way around. Okay, I want to talk about that. Now, in my developer training course, I mentioned headings there, but it's mainly in the context of screen reader users, because screen reader users go looking for headings in page to find sections that they're interested in. This here, though, headings are important for everyone. This here is a picture of my local supermarket. If you're brand knowledgeable, you'll see it's a Morrison's. Now, I'm familiar with the layout of this store, but if I was walking into this store for the first time, these headings and subheadings that you can find here are relevant and will help me find my way around this store. And it's true within pages as well. Headings are there for everybody, not just for screen reader users, okay? Now, lockdown has been hard on my parents, effectively because of their age and their medical conditions. They've been effectively isolating for most of the time. Whilst they use the web on a regular basis, they never really had done online shopping before. They've had to get to grips with it. And it was a bit of a challenge to start with, but they made it in the end. And it's really important that we use good labeling to help people of their age, and anyone effectively, to actually work out what's going on. When you've got a form, it's a good idea to have some instructions at the start. This is from a financial example that here for opening a current account. Tell people why you're collecting their details and what you're going to do with it. People are much more savvy about privacy these days, so let people know. Also tell people which bits of information are required, and don't use jargon like mandatory or required fields or something. This is a good example where it's just using plain language. Instructions are relevant not just at the start of the forms, but during the forms, during the process as well. Here, what I'm doing, you might guess, is to actually book a delivery for my shopping, and it's telling me how much it's going to cost me if I book it at a certain time. It's not immediately clear to everyone what's actually going on here. And remember, developers need to remember that when they're building websites, not everyone's going to be as web literate as they are. Okay, help in forms. Quite important here. Sometimes you'll need stuff in a specific format, a date of birth, or when you want your insurance cover to start, or in credit card numbers. That always seems to get me. Do I put the spaces in my credit card numbers or not? Tell people in the prompt for the fields, in the labels, what's required. Don't hide it all behind this stuff. Not everyone understands what these icons are for. So put it up front in the label. Okay. I've covered pretty much everything I'm going to say, but I just want to mention the Accessibility for Developers training course that I run with Hassell Inclusion. If you work in an organization or developers who might be interested, please point them at our website and we might be able to accommodate them. Okay. And now I'm going to pass it on to, I think someone's taking control already, haven't they?
It's me. Thanks, Graham. Great stuff. Yeah, so hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about designing for older people. I work with designers closely. I've been working with some designers in a large organization this year and small agencies as well. So why should they be thinking about designing for older people? The trend I've seen in large organizations is for them to be using sort of design toolkits now. So the hard work happens at the beginning, And then all of a sudden, the designer's role isn't quite as important because everything's been done and it's a case of piecing things together. So how do they differentiate themselves as designers and add value to projects and journeys, making them as accessible as possible? So we're going to look at 5 different areas around designing with older people in mind. Looking at page layout, lengths of pages, fonts, text spacing, and customization. So understanding and complexity. I think this is not just for older people, this is for everybody. But certainly in my experience, I've often had conversations with my dad where he's pressed a button, he's clicked something, and all of a sudden he's got a toolbar on his, every time he opens up his laptop, he's got a toolbar there that's displaying some advertising or something that he can't get rid of. So we've had multiple conversations where I've had to talk him through how to get rid of those types of things. And understanding, what's a browser, what's an operating system, how does this all hang together? So for research purposes only, I visited the Daily Mail website earlier this week. And when I got there, the page loads, there's a huge advert behind it and a video started playing in the corner. So pretty much everything that can cause an issue for accessibility was there on one website. And this is a couple of the quotes we've got here from some user research we've been doing around, you should actually be thinking about designing clear and clutter-free pages. So for this person, this is the Daily Mail website. The way this website is, the video playing and things on the side and along the top, it feels haphazard, shouty, and it's intimidating as it's throwing a lot at you at a time. It puts me on edge. That's not what you want people to be feeling about using your digital technology. So older people with motor needs, sometimes you have unwanted movement, tremors, constrictions or pain, arthritis. What types of things can you use? Speech input, you might want to use a keyboard or even a trackball. So where is it important to be thinking then from a design point of view? So setting your page lengths appropriately for the function. I think not just older people, but almost everybody, if there's too much scrolling going on a website or app. So for one person, a lot of scrolling makes me feel dizzy. I find it overwhelming. And there's so much. Scroll down, there's still more. So knowing, and then you have to, if you haven't found what you're looking for, scrolling all the way back up to the top, it can be tiring for everybody. So setting the appropriate page length is a really good design principle. So with vision, Jonathan's touched on this already with his mum, has found this very useful, the sort of settings you have on a Kindle. People can often have cataracts or dry eyes when you get older. So again, the larger fonts, the higher contrast, being able to backlight. I really love reader view on websites. Just clicking on that and gets rid of all the distractions on a page, something I find really, really useful. So a principle here is font size. For a designer, having in the back of their mind, just thinking about, okay, as a minimum, I'm going to set my font size at 12 points. And that then means as they go into the design and they're creating headers, other bits of content that are bigger to stand out, they're starting with a really, really good baseline. So people, I need decent sized text. Larger text is good for me because of my ADHD. I need bigger text as well. I personally find it very, very rewarding because I have on my iPhone, I have it set to slightly larger in my text sizes. And when an app respects that, it makes me happy. When it doesn't, it makes me quite frustrated, especially when I have to, there's no other mechanism for trying to increase it in a native app. And this sort of goes hand in hand with text spacing again. So you can see here, this is another example from the Daily Mail that's really, really dense. And this particular user, this was far too dense for me to read. I have eye tracking issues. My eyes skip lines. Dense text like this is even more difficult to focus on. So again, thinking about spacing between paragraphs and text to make it much more readable for everybody. So we've touched on customization slightly already, and people really want to be able to take control of the experience. I want the site in my colors. The challenge is, as Graham pointed out, is unless you've got a developer as a son, then sometimes finding particular settings on any web, setting them on your browser can be very, very challenging. So how do we make that better? And often the onboarding process now, when you, certainly with Apple, it takes you through different settings where it might ask you if you want to increase text size. You can have things set in a larger, slightly more zoomed in way. So I think as design goes on, actually setting those preferences for people up front is going to be really, really useful. So one of the biggest issues, I think, for not just older people, but for everybody, is passwords, remembering passwords. Touch ID, I think everyone finds that incredibly useful. Something like trying to find your keys as well, being able to use technology for that. So not having to rely on memory. So to sum up, what does this mean for, digital product design? 5 things here. Vision. Is the text large enough? Can it be resized? Jonathan's touched on hearing, captioning, making sure all the video content you have are captioned. And then touch, making buttons easy to select on any platform. Understanding, making the content as simple as possible to use. And finally, as we just touched on there, memory, not requiring people to use their memory. So just a few pointers there on how designing for older people can actually make you a better designer. And there's a lot more that we cover in our design course, Accessibility for Designers, which you can bring your own work along to, and we work through your journeys and designs, which is a really interactive course. So now I'm going to hand back over to Jonathan, who's going to take us through the wider picture.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. Okay, so just one final section here, and then we'll be with your questions. So remember, you can get a copy of my book, whichever one of my 2 books you want, if you ask questions through. So pop them in the chat. We've got a good few already, which is great, but we will have time for some more as well. I just wanted to kind of, if you like, round things out by talking about a few insights from some projects that we've done which were specifically for older people, or had, if you like, a bias in the audience that would be interested in them towards older people, and a few more things to kind of situate this in the realities. The first thing is just to be a little bit more clear about the difference between access needs. So most of what we've been talking about today is, if you like, people's limit on capability. I can't see so well, I can't hear so well, that sort of thing. But the other kind of key thing that has been touched on is what the government, at least, call assisted digital. So that's all of the areas around digital inclusion. So lack of skills, or for that matter, lack of access to technologies in the way that, if you like, other people would have. So there's, if you like, the way of thinking about older people is very much around the intersection of these 2 things. Effectively, it's a double whammy, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for people who are older to get a good experience. You know, it may be the first time they've really tried to do online shopping. So it's not something that they're familiar with. And also, like my mum, they may have difficulty seeing. So the two are interacting with each other, even if there's no access issues with respect to actually getting access to the computer itself and the broadband, which obviously some people have difficulty with themselves. There's still quite a lot going on that stands between the person and a great experience. And, you know, just some stats around digital inclusion. You know, around 79% of the population of the UK are sort of in this green space here. So they've got good digital skills. They can go to a website that they've never used before and pretty much figure out what's going on. They can be confident and they can get stuff done. But 21% of the population don't have that. So if we just take my mum, for example, right down at level 1, these are people for whom they just reject the whole idea of the internet. So, you know, I've never had it, I never will have it, I just don't want it. Well, no, that's not my mum at all. Section 2 was online, but no longer. So gave it a try, but no thanks. Again, my mum is a little bit of that, but she knows that there are some things she really needs to do on it. So willing and unable, well, she's willing. Is she unable? Well, it depends on how you create your website, really, and how much help there is around. So I think she's probably at level 4. She's kind of reluctantly online. She does it when she has to, you know, like COVID situations and things like that. But, you know, obviously, you know, lockdown happening again at the moment in small ways, but you can still get out to the shops. I think she still prefer to do things offline, but where online is the only game in town, she really needs these things to be good. So, you know, she's learned the ropes in some ways. And in fact, for some things, task specific, when I take her through, for example, using her email, or for that matter, kind of like how to move around her skybox, that sort of thing, what she does is she writes things down. I mean, she writes things down like lots of, you know, literally step by step. 1, do this, 2, do this, 3, do this. That's a very task-specific way of doing things. So that if she can't remember how to do that thing the next time, she can go back to her book and work all the way through. I can see some people smiling. You've had this experience as well. That doesn't make her an expert on any of these things. It just makes her somebody who can do that because she has the book on it. And actually, you can oscillate up and down on here. A lot of people who are older actually may have times where they feel a lot more able digitally, and then actually over time find things harder because they get more confused, etc. If you like, when you're in decline at the end of your life, you know, a lot of things change, and that's something that people get very used to. So a few things about how then you kind of do some interesting things around that, stuff that we haven't touched on yet. The first one is assumptions. So the first assumption that most people made was that WCAG would give you everything that older people needed as well as disabled people. Not true. Quite a lot, but not everything. And that's why WAGE is there. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. But here's a really interesting thing. So a lot of people a few years ago in the design community were talking about icons and icons for kids. For example, most kids have never seen a Polaroid camera. So therefore, the Instagram icon doesn't really mean anything to them. You know, they're kids, so they work out it's Instagram pretty quick, but they don't know what that thing is on it. Similarly, my son, who's 10, knows the icon next to it is the save icon. But if I asked him what this kind of black thing behind the blue arrow is, he would look at me as if I came from a different planet. Those of us who are a bit older know that's a floppy disk, which is what you use to save things onto. Yeah, that's not in his vocabulary at all. So a lot of people in design started working out, yeah, it's probably a good idea to check your assumptions, to check that people know what this icon means. And so here are some interesting things from the other end of life. These are some of the things that we've noticed in user testing and on various different projects that we've worked on that older people have had a real trouble working out. So this one here, the kind of interesting arrow one, I'm guessing we all know, that's share. Now, if you hadn't come upon it before, that looks a little bit more like Exit, or kind of, well, it's certainly very confusing. And when I showed it to lots of people, they went, oh, yeah, I'm glad I'm here. I've never really understood that. Can you help me? You know, that's what user testing with these audiences is like a lot of the time. The middle one, I'm guessing we all know that that's the cart. Now, my mum did not. She's been to Tesco's and Co-op and all the rest of the supermarkets. She's used things that look like this all of the time. She had no idea that the metaphor for online shopping was you put something in something that looks like a shopping cart. That wasn't what she was expecting at all. So this icon at the top of the screen was completely, she just had no idea. It's like, okay, you've now selected loads of items that you want to buy. What do you do next? No idea. She had to learn that the metaphor being used was a cart. And obviously this thing over here, we all know from, well, kind of pretty much the last kind of 10 years really, where after Apple sort of brought out the iPhone and Google brought out Google Maps and suddenly everything got GPSed, we know that this is a marker to tell us where we are or what we're looking at. Location specific services, all of this sort of stuff, no idea from most people that I know who are older, who we've done research with. So again, you have to think about, do I need to explain what I'm talking about? Here's another one that is kind of rather urgent at the moment. This thing, I guess we all know, is a QR code. And this thing stands between you and getting one of these at the moment, a coronavirus test. And so here's the thing. You need one of these, and I know this because thankfully we tested negative, but my whole family went to try and get a COVID test last Friday because my son had a cough, and we were advised that we should go and do that. When we got there, we found that you weren't allowed in unless you had one of these things, and unfortunately, the system was down at that point. So whereas we thought, and we had a screenshot that proved that we could go in and get our tests, the man on the gate, the big burly security guard said, unless you have one of these things, you're not getting in. So sometimes you need to make sure that that works for everyone. And to give them their due, the system wasn't working very well last week with the people who created this. So very early on in the process of saying, I want to test, it asks you, do you have a mobile phone number? Do you have an email address? How do we get this passport to attest to you? So it's really important to make sure that that whole user journey, even when you are doing something in a rush, like the testing, works for everybody, whether or not they have a mobile phone or an email address or whatever. So just a few things recently that have come up, and I just wanted to tackle one other assumption, and then we'll have some questions. So this is the last one. The assumption is that actually older people just don't like this stuff anyway. So just like, why bother? And I wanted to show you how wrong that can be. A few years ago, we were asked to go by Microsoft to the Royal Berkshire Hospital, where in the stroke unit, they were testing out a number of games on the Xbox using Kinect. So the idea was that people who need to recover the use of their limbs can do that in a fun way by playing Xbox games. And they said, this is going really well and it feels really breakthrough, but some things aren't going so well. And this was the quote from our day of user research there. The idea of the games are good, but they're not made for us. So the games were made for, well, me, I guess, and kids and my little son and all the rest of it. And what we did was we looked at it and did a whole project to say, okay, there's something about this that really works. The idea of using the technology is really appealing to the people. They don't like the games, but actually the occupational therapists are saying that the actions that the games use as well aren't quite right. So we said, okay, what are the actions? How do you support somebody who's regaining their limb power, strength, dexterity at this point? And then how do we create games that work for them? And we came up with a co-designed solution. So we literally got 8 people that we worked with to say, okay, we've worked with the occupational therapist. They say this is going to be good for you. What's cool? what would make you want to do this? And we came up with dance games and all of these sorts of things. There was a game where you regained the strength in your leg by kicking footballs into a goal, this sort of thing. They loved it, absolutely loved it. So what I'm saying is loads of great things can come from this. We won awards, all of that sort of stuff. Just gives you some ideas for today. We've got some time for questions at the end. Pete, anything in particular you think we should be answering?
So there's a good question, kind of two variations. One was, should we build a website for everybody, and then one for people who are older? And a similar question is, how do we cope with what works well for millennials and a good design, and what might be work well for older people? How do we kind of deal with that juxtaposition?
Smashing, cool. Rob, any ideas on that one?
So I feel that it comes down to what the purpose of the website is, and occasionally thinking about inclusive design that works really well for older people, the nature of how a millennial or somebody younger might be using the site. They might really appreciate when they're outside on their phone with bright sunlight shining on it, that they can actually see what they're doing, because we've designed it in such a way that, you know, it's still big enough to look at. And occasionally, if it loads really, really quickly as well, because it's been coded properly, there's not loads of things flashing around or loading, really heavy JavaScript loading in the background. Again, I think everyone appreciates being able to tap on things and it just working as expected. So sometimes putting a mobile lens on things from an inclusion point of view can really, really help as well.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Rob. I mean, probably the thing I would say is know your audience, really. So yeah, different audiences maybe want different things. That's the place to look at your personalization. You know, do you want an OAP version? Well, actually, if the whole site is for OAPs, then it is the whole version. If you're the government, you try and make things as simple as possible, and you don't really care what it looks like so much, because it's all about, can people use it, not does it look pretty, is it going to win, you know, sort of like beauty awards. I think the other thing, though, would be absolutely when there are occasions where different audiences' requirements completely diverge from each other, then if when you're creating something, you know that if you see that segmentation, if we do something for these guys get a worse experience and vice versa. That's the point where personalization can really kick in. And obviously, you know, that's the great thing about computers. You know, you cannot personalize a little bit of text on a wall in a museum, as we were trying to do. You know, how big should that text be for people to be able to read it? Well, you just have to make it as big as you can get it if you're lecture setting something onto a wall. If that's a screen, actually, you can give people the ability, as we did with one museum, where if people hold up a QR code to a camera above it, it recognizes that they want the text bigger, and it makes the text bigger just for them. That's magical. That's the sort of thing that you have in your hand every single time you're creating a site. So yeah, good stuff.
And I just want to respond to one other question, because Marta's saying, how do we get people interested in this? And I think the answer, which covers all three of them, is diversity in thinking and diversity in groups. I've been in software for a couple of decades, and the danger of it is it's often metropolitan, more often male, and more often people who are younger, in their 20s. And the risk of just being in that group, talking to that group, you'll see things with your own eyesight and your own mindset. And therefore, making sure you've got people of diverse sort of culture, background, ability, gender, and all those other things that are important, actually makes the team design stuff better, because they're going to see from different perspectives. So when Marta was saying, how do we help our students at universities? You might want to think about, what does it mean to have diverse teams? That you get some students and get some older people, or get some people outside the university to be part of their design team, so they realize what it means in the real world. Because otherwise it's students talking to students.
Bring in some real people and make sure there's diversity there. Thanks, Pete.